in the spring. So it was a pretty precarious situation. And, to me and my colleagues, what Boris offered was this, as I said, unique combination of qualities. First of all, probably the most trusted senior politician, certainly in our party, on the issue of Brexit, which is the defining issue of the day. And I think everything that we've seen from his election as Prime Minister has confirmed that in the way he's gone about it, no one, I think, is in any doubt about his commitment to deliver Brexit by the end of October and to fight hard to get us a good deal, and if not, to prepare us properly to leave without. But then beyond that, what also attracted us, as you said, the kind of newer generation focused on domestic issues, it was, his track record as a liberal conservative governing from the centre with an inspiring platform of ideas around infrastructure, around education, around spreading opportunity, and that dynamic alignment between the free enterprise economy and funding public services. That's what particularly excited me about him. We saw that when he was mayor in London, and that's what we, I think, have been doing at a pace since he was elected and the government came together at the end of July. You've seen that relentless focus on people's priorities, public services, the economy. So everything thus far, I think, has been as we expected. The other thing we said in that article was, of course, he's a proven winner, and whether you judge that by 2 mayoral elections at a time when the Conservatives were polling 17 points behind Labour in London at that time, Boris went on to win. Also the referendum that no one thought could be won, he led and won. And we're expecting a general election this year. It's certainly something that we welcome and are looking forward to, and I have every confidence that Boris is brilliantly placed to lead us to victory when that comes.
And will that election happen, do you think, before Brexit or after Brexit? I mean, obviously, adverts are telling us October 31st, we are leaving. Some people in Parliament seem less sure about that.
Yeah, well, look, Parliament is obviously, is trying to do what it can to frustrate us in our aim of delivering Brexit. Those battles and tussles are going to keep happening over the coming weeks, and I think we'll just watch that. We do have this slightly bizarre situation of, a leader of the opposition just unwilling to do their paid job, as the Prime Minister kind of memorably put it the other day. I mean, their single purpose, what they're paid to do by the taxpayer, is to oppose and try and replace the government, and here we are. We've got a leader of the opposition just unwilling to do that for all the reasons that we know. So it doesn't seem like we're going to have that election, in the immediate future. But I think when it does come, we're very well placed. I think people are responding very well. I certainly am finding that when I'm out knocking doors. Hopefully you are as well. People, whatever direction they've come from on the Brexit issue, clearly are seeing a government that's got grip, that's got determination, that is on one hand focusing on Brexit, on the other hand focusing on things that they care about, like the NHS, keeping them safe, getting money into schools, and they see on the other side a leader of the opposition who's clearly just not fit to lead, not able to make decisions, more delay. They're not attracted to that. The Prime Minister's way of communicating cuts through. So as I said, when the election comes, we should be in very good shape.
Now, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, and I'm sure we'll get back to Brexit sort of fairly repeatedly, not least when the questions start. But one of the reasons I want to talk to you is, you are, regional growth is now sort of all the rage, levelling up, as the government calls it, and as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, you are in a sort of leading position to act on that. But also, you're the MP for a seat up in Yorkshire. More pertinently, back in 2016, very shortly after the election, you wrote a very good report for the Centre for Policy Studies called the Free Ports Opportunity, arguing that free ports were a great way to help the left behind regions. And now, of course, you're in a position to help drive that through. And in the middle of that, you sort of ended up as a local government minister again in the department which sort of deals with that. I mean, is that a sort of accidental through line of your career, or is that actually something that is that kind of something that's kind of quite core to?
Yeah. I think that, that's something I've come to through my experiences, especially my experiences in politics. As you said, I have the privilege of representing a northern seat, and ultimately, around the cabinet table, there's generally a kind of small number of people who represent northern seats. I also represent a rural seat as well, which gives me a slightly different slant on how things are happening down in Whitehall. And also have a brilliant Conservative mayor up near me in Teesside, Ben Houchen, and we have a string of marginal seats that I campaign in, with Darlington, Bishop Auckland, Stockton South, Middlesbrough South. So my politics is quite informed by that experience. And it's very clear, partly because of the Brexit referendum, but just more generally when you look at the data, that the growth that the country has enjoyed over a period of time has not been evenly shared. I think there was just a report out today or yesterday, which again kind of proved the point that in London and the southeast, we have one of the most prosperous and economically dynamic parts of all of Europe, but we also have several of the most unequal parts in Europe, and the gap between London and our other regions is wider than the gap between capital cities and regions in almost any other large developed economy. And so that's not great. I mean, that's not just great because everyone deserves a chance at that same prosperity. It's also just not great for us politically. If you believe, as I think everyone in this room would believe, and CPS and CapEx believe, we believe in a free enterprise economy, right? We think that is the best way to raise people's living standards, to pay for the things we care about. If people start to feel that system isn't working for them, that they're sitting up in Teesside or wherever, looking down at London and the southeast, or they're sitting in a rural area looking down at cities, and they say, well, hang on, this system isn't quite working, they're going to be much more open to experimenting in quite a radical way with changing the system. So I think, both just because it's economically wrong, but also politically wrong, we need to find a way to get growth to every part of the country. And we talked about free ports, and we can talk about that again. That's one idea that we can use after we get Brexit done to drive growth in places like Southampton, where I'm from, which is a port city, Teesside being another obvious one. Opportunity zones is another idea that we've discussed, Rob. But also infrastructure. And I've just I've come here from Northallerton in North Yorkshire. It took me just over 2 hours in the train, trundling along the Trans-Pennine Express. That journey is about 60 odd miles. It takes about the same time to get here from London, and that journey is 200 and something odd miles, right? That is simply not a sustainable way to run the country.
What I think I'm hearing here is that you're going to cancel HS2. Is that?
Well, what you are hearing is someone who's very, very committed to Northern Powerhouse Rail and that whole agenda. And there's different arguments for different parts of infrastructure, but I find a very compelling one, actually. The thesis in George Osborne's first speech about the Northern Powerhouse, he talked about the kind of unique collection of big cities we have in the north, Manchester being at the heart of that, but yet they are very poorly connected. And if you take the Central Line, those of you that have come up from London or are familiar with it, it's about 41 miles from end to end, but obviously is completely commutable within that. If you did the same thing and created that same commuting 40-mile Central Line type transport system around Manchester, you'd pick up several million people. Now, if that was one economic functional area, it would look like Tokyo, essentially, was the point that he'd made. And that's what you will get to drive up productivity and ensure that economic growth is more evenly shared. So, that's the solution that we must do, and the Prime Minister said that will be a priority for him. The Leeds to Manchester train line is something that we've already essentially green-lighted and are now going to flesh out how exactly that's going to work. But also broadband. I, as I said, represent a rural area, and broadband is equally as important as road and rail infrastructure, and we're going to be doing that as well.
So you mentioned earlier that you come from Southampton, but you also come from an NHS family. I think both of your parents were NHS workers. They started working in a pharmacy. I mean, were they sort of pleased or puzzled or incredibly depressed when their son said, what, Mum, Dad, what I really want to do is become a Conservative MP?
Yes. No, well, they're not remotely political. So I didn't grow up in a political household, but I'd had a career in business before that. But even that, they didn't fully understand. I mean, they're kind of classic Indian immigrant parents. You go do a degree that leads to a very specific job, and then you have security of income. So that was their kind of driving mindset. So when I first said I'm going to study economics for A level, that was something that my mum was very worried about in the first instance, because it was not obvious what job that would lead to in her mind. Then I went to university and there was philosophy in the title of my degree. That worried her even more.
So you are one of these PPE students who are in the country?
Yes, exactly. Well, it's those lawyers that now, there's more lawyers in Parliament than PPEs, I keep being told. Not that it seems to have done us much good recently, but no. So, and I ended up having a career in business, which, again, they struggle to get at first, but then were happy because it seemed secure. So politics, for me, was surprising for them. It was something I came to slightly just sideways, but they've been incredibly supportive.
But then why? I mean, as with your boss at the Treasury, both of you, had extremely, successful careers, earning quite a lot of money, I assume, without people calling you an absolute arsehole on social media. I mean, or every social media channel they can find, sort of 24 hours a day. I mean, why decide actually what I really want to do is tramp around the streets, knocking on doors, trying to get myself selected as an MP.
Yeah. Well, you say about the getting abuse and you didn't get it before. Actually, just after I got elected, I'm trying to think on what basis. There was one of these big protests in Parliament Square. Now they're all the time, but it was, I forget what it was about. But I was a brand new MP, and I was walking across Parliament Square with a colleague who's also a new MP at the time. And anyway, so we're strolling along, and as you said, it was new, and people are hurling abuse at us and saying, "Oh, bloody politicians! You lot are all useless politicians, useless MPs." Da 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 da. And I said, "You're a few weeks in. It was, you're kind of like, wow, that's quite, it's quite hard to take." And but I kind of glanced at him, and he was grinning. And it looked like he was really happy. And I was very surprised by this. So I said to him, I said, Jeremy, why? Do you hear what they're saying about us politicians, right? It's not particularly flattering. Like, why are you so happy? And he said, Rishi, my dear boy, you have to understand, I used to be an investment banker. And so it's not clearly not all great coming from finance. But no, you said, why do it? Actually, it was my parents that motivated me to do it, but not in a political way. I think, as you said, my dad was a GP, my mum was a pharmacist, and I grew up working in their surgery, in the pharmacy, delivering medicines to people who couldn't get in to pick them up. And people would always stop and talk to me about my mum and dad, right? So they would always say, "Oh, you're Mrs. Sunak's son, you're Dr. Sunak's son." And then they'd have some story about how my parents had helped them, or their parents, or grandparents, or children. And I thought that was amazing. I mean, they had done the same job in the same place, kind of a mile from each other for 30 years. And it was pretty clear that they as individuals were able to have a pretty amazing impact on this community around us. And you saw that whenever we went and someone came to say something. And that I found very inspiring. And that was really my motivation for becoming an MP, was to be able to make that same difference in a community as well. And I hope I am able to do that in North Yorkshire.
And becoming a Tory MP was presumably because you'd studied economics?
Yes, so the medicine route was unavailable to me. Yeah, exactly. But I said it does give you, I mean, Joe, we take it for granted, but my dad was a doctor, he had surgeries, MPs, we have surgeries. I mean, that's what we do. And that connection that you have with your constituents is often lost in all the debate in Westminster. I mean, funny, my predecessor is William Hague, and William would always say it's this unique connection we have in this country, that he'd be at some summit as foreign secretary, sitting there trying to resolve Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever crisis was going on at the time at some very important, summit. And he'd be sitting with Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State there, and they'd finish this thing, and then she'd be like, "Oh, what are you doing now?" And then he'd literally be like, "Well, I'm going to get on my plane, fly back to Yorkshire, and then I'll be sitting in, a village in Hawes in the Yorkshire Dales, talking to Mrs. Chapman about X, Y, Z." And they find this amazing, right? Hillary Clinton would find this whole thing, both baffling and wonderful, right? To maintain that connection with your local community.
So you talk about that connection, which is a good segue to the next topic. So if you take any of the attractive CPS tote bags that we're handing out here, you'll find in it a copy of a pamphlet I've just published called Popular Capitalism. And what it is a kind of attempt by me to synthesize, kind of basically but the idea is it's something you can give to someone who says, why would you be a capitalist? Why aren't capitalists evil? Aren't conservative? Aren't Tories are evil? Free marketeers are evil? You only care about the rich. You only care about the international bankers and billionaires. But one of the things I discovered researching that is, you come to an event like this, and you're surrounded by members of the tribe, and you all say to each other, of course we are the party of home ownership, of low taxes, of law and order, of opportunity, of aspiration. And then you go out and ask the voters, what do you think the Tories stand for? And certainly under the last kind of administration, the answer came back, we don't know what the Tories stand for, or when we do know, we think it's for the rich. And I think 2015, 2017, both of them are kind of campaigns driven by don't vote for the other guys rather than vote for us because this is how we will use our values to make your lives better. So I mean, is that? And I think this is why Brexit is a sort of superhuman challenge. But then beyond that, there is that challenge of connecting to people and persuading them that you share their values. I mean, how on earth do you go about doing that?
Yeah. So I that's why the CPS is so important, and CapEx, and everyone who's interested in these ideas. It's great to see so many people here. We clearly, after the election in 2017 and that election campaign and thereafter, just kind of lost our mojo when it came to having confidence in our economic beliefs. And I remember I was sitting here at one of our panels this time last year, and Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party, just announced their kind of plan to take 10% of companies and in theory give them to workers, and we literally had nothing to say about that, right? And we just didn't know how to react to it, and it was an extraordinary thing, right? I mean, that is essentially just kind of state expropriation of someone's hard-earned business that they've built up, and it was just a good example of just a kind of lack of economic narrative. So we must absolutely correct that, right? We're not going to be able to win any elections unless we have something compelling to say about our ability to run the economy, but not in this kind of wonky way. Our ability to run the economy in a way that's going to work for your family, right? It's going to mean more money in your pocket. It's going to mean the public services you care about are funded, etc. So, there's a couple of things. One is the policies, but the second is, which you touch on in the report, in the polling, is how we communicate them. And if you're going to be self-critical about us as a party, I'd say sometimes, our language when it comes to economic stuff tends to be a bit dry. It tends to be a bit kind of accountant-oriented. It tends to be a bit wonky. We've got to be more, I think, emotive about how we describe our view of a strong economy and why a strong economy is important. And there's a very strong moral underpinning for why we think we should run sound finances. There's a moral underpinning for why we think we should respect private property and let people kind of keep more of the money they earn. And I think sometimes we shy away from making those arguments. And I think we're very fortunate now to have a leader who is not only a brilliant communicator, also deeply believes these things. And I made this point in the leadership campaign. He's probably the first senior Tory politician in a long time who was unafraid to use the word wealth and talk about wealth creation and why that was a good thing. And it was kind of, you stood up when you hear that. I did, because I was like, wow, no one said that in a while. But he's able to link that, and he talks about the symmetry between that and well-funded public services in a way that I think cuts through to people. And it's the start of trying to have that conversation and persuade people of why what we're doing, as I said, has values and a moral underpinning behind it.
Well, it's interesting. We have a cardboard cutout of Margaret Thatcher at the back if anyone wants to take a selfie with her later. But the first page of Thatcher's 87 manifesto is basically the first page of David Cameron's 2015 manifesto, which is saying because we have succeeded in keeping economic growth strong, we are able to afford the NHS. I mean, it's not as if the argument hasn't been made before. It's just people. It's compared with the you're not funding the NHS properly. It's quite a hard.
Yeah, I think the challenge with that manifesto of hers, I think it was, Think 79, there was a good line in it about, her priority is, she said, people and the way they live their lives, right? It was right up front as just kind of an overarching message. And it was whatever she did, it was just making sure that it connected to ordinary people and how they live their lives on a day-to-day basis. And I think partly the issue we've had is the last 9 years, the economic debate has been almost singularly about public finances and borrowing and spending, and that is quite a narrow territory to have an economic conversation on. And I think what you will see in the next election campaign is, of course, that is going to be important, and it will be a part of it, and we will contrast our sound management of the nation's money with Labour's profligacy. But on the other hand, there will be a much broader, I think, narrative, or there should be, about as economic competence, economic management, all the other things that go into having a successful economy that will make a difference to people's lives. And I think that we need to do.
But obviously, it's noticeable that the spending taps have been turned back on to an extent. But you're saying that there is a limit to the largesse.
Yeah, look, we clearly have turned a dial on austerity, right? And that spending review that the Chancellor and I conducted a few weeks ago was the largest increase in day-to-day spending for departments in 15 years. So without a doubt, it represented a change. And that narrative of austerity is over. Not a single department faced a real terms cut for the first time again in 15 years. So it was definitely a change. And does that mean that the spending taps are on? Absolutely not. I mean, we conducted that spending round within the existing fiscal framework that Philip Hammond had left, which means that borrowing in the forecast year would be less than 2%. Debt was still forecast to fall in that year as well. So it was a necessary change, I think, but partly for political reasons, and that this narrative of austerity has to end, but also that there's sound economics for it. We've got the economy now to a place where borrowing is under control, so it's right to now invest in what people care about. And so that was a change. But I think in the future that you will start to see us talk more about infrastructure and capital investment, and I think you might hear some more about that this week from the Chancellor.
But in terms of, obviously, we are due a budget at some point, as well as the spending review. But presumably all of that is sort of massively determined by the fate of the shape of Brexit. How relaxed are you about a deal versus no deal scenario? How likely do you think those are at this point?
Well, without a doubt, if we end up with no deal, that will require an economic response. The Chancellor's been very clear that the Treasury and the government stands ready to provide whatever the appropriate economic response is at that time. There's lots of levers that one can use. We'll look at the landscape and make the appropriate adjustments, investments as are required. Typically there would be a fiscal event in the autumn. You would expect that that would be planned for. But you're right. There are two different versions of what that might look like, and your response in both of those cases would be slightly different, but it doesn't mean we can't prepare for everything. And
the Yellowhammer stuff that's gone around, I'm told by people who are in a position to know that represents a sort of that when the new government took office, there really hadn't been enough prep on no deal, whereas but actually there has been an awful lot of preparation for it. So where would you, at a sort of on a sliding scale from 1 to 10, where would you say we were when you took office, and where are we now?
Well, I think what you did see, not to say about the past, what you've without doubt seen from the first day of this government is an enormous focus on this. So I don't know if you've got Michael coming to any of these, but there's now a daily cabinet committee called XO that meets for probably an hour and a half every single day. Michael chairs it. I'm together with the Deputy Minister, the only other people that are there every single day. So I've come bird's eye view of what's happening, and then other ministers are coming as it concerns their department, depending on what we're discussing. But this is a committee unlike a normal committee where there's just a lot of chat, and this is a committee where on the wall, and the reason we have it down in the Cobra rooms is so that we can have this functionality to give you behind the scenes what's happening, and it's just a room which has screens which are attached to computers where you can have just live recording of what's going on. And so as we're discussing, we're making decisions, they're recorded, right, we've decided this, move on, or this is what needs to be done. So we don't have an answer on this, you over there, go figure it out and come back tomorrow, the day after, next week with a clear deadline with an answer on it. And we've been operating at that pace now for, as I said, since the end of July. And it's made an enormous difference. On all the practical preparations that are happening on the ground, all the things that are happening behind the scenes that that would be hard to see, because of the focus from government, because of the funding that the Chancellor's provided, £2 billion of incremental funding this year. I think we are in much better shape than we were previously, and you've seen that. That's not just me saying it. The Bank of England recently actually upgraded their own forecast. Obviously, they have a relatively, they have their view of what no deal would look like, but whatever that view was, they have now upgraded it because of the extra preparations that have been made. So I think that is evidence that we are making real progress.
And are there still areas you're worried about?
No, I think that the most obvious challenge from no deal will be at the short straits. Everybody knows that, and obviously that we are quite reliant on that trade flows. There will be new customs procedures that are required, and because of the nature of that trade, roll on, roll off, it's a closed loop circuit. We want to minimize any disruption that might happen there. So we've done an enormous amount, and HMRC, Department for Transportation, are doing just a massive amount of work to simplify our customs systems so they work really well for people who have new customs procedures to follow, actively engaging with small business, big business, hauliers especially, to make sure that they are going to be informed about the new things that they will have to do. And you're seeing that on the ground. You're seeing truck pop-up sites appearing all over the place, not just here but in Europe, the marketing campaign that you would have got a handle of, booklets for everybody, and we're seeing it behind the scenes in all the activity that people are doing and registering for the right customs paperwork.
And does this include a brilliant secret plan for the Irish border?
Well, the Irish border. We've said very clearly there will be no infrastructure, and we will not plan to do anything differently. And we have a very specific day one model for that. So on our end, there will be very little that changes. Obviously, similarly, we can't control what the French might do. We can't control what the Irish might do. As you would imagine, at a technical level, there are lots of conversations that are happening on the ground between officials. Now, obviously, there will be a political kind of overlay, and that might ultimately determine what happens. But I think there are good constructive working relationships between our customs people, our ports people, and those over in Calais. And you're seeing that. You're seeing them. They are also investing in more customs officers. They've set up a new border inspection post. They've got plans. That's to inspect some of the animal side of things. They've been very clear at an official level that they also want to prioritise flow. But ultimately, they will make decisions when we get there.
And flipping that last question on its head, what are you most excited by about Brexit? I mean, you were a Leave voter back in 2016. What are the key things that you think?
Yeah, well, I probably put them in three buckets. I think one is obviously we touched on it before, but economic innovation. Right. I mean, I think one of the things that we've been grappling with for a while is our growth, which is still superior to many of our European neighbours, and certainly will be this year when you look at what's happening. It's still not as fast as we'd like. Right. We're kind of trundling along at 1.5% of GDP every year. That's not stellar. We'd love that to be higher. I think we'd all would, and that would also solve many of some of the challenges that we face with an aging population and greater demand on public services. Ultimately, if we could generate higher growth, that would be fantastic, and people would feel that in their pockets. So, what can we do differently after we leave the EU that might accelerate that growth? Obviously, we can look differently at regulation. I mean, Michael and in particular George Friedman have talked about, for example, in the R&D and the innovation and life sciences space, there's different things we could do. We've mentioned free ports as an obvious example. So I think that's kind of one bucket of exciting things. The second is around trade, and any way you look at it, and I wrote about this previously, I think the EU is not kind of the global face of free trade, and if you look at the experience of mid-sized economies like Canada, like Australia, like South Korea, like Switzerland, these are all economies that are smaller than ours. They all have a better set of trade agreements for their economy than we do for ours, whilst being part of the EU. So I'm confident that over time we can develop a better set of trading relationships, which will cut costs for people when they're doing their daily shop, because we're not protecting industries in Europe they want to protect, but also will link our economy to some of the faster growing parts of the world. So I think that's the second exciting opportunity. And the third thing would be immigration. Now, I say that as coming from a family of immigrants, but you've got to have consent from people about what you're doing. And clearly when it comes to immigration, there is rightly a perception that British politicians are not in control of our immigration system, and that is just as a fact correct, right? I mean, we have an open border with 27 other countries with no say over how that's working. That's not a system that anyone else in the world replicates. So once we change that and put a system in place, and I think the important thing there is the word control, right? I think people are nuanced about this. They don't want to pull up a drawbridge and build a wall. What they want is to know that their politicians, accountable to them, are in control of that system, so we figure out who's coming here, what they're doing when they're here. And I think once we do that, the fact that we are going to do it, that allows us also to open up to very skilled, highly talented people from around the world. And you're seeing that now, and you've seen that in some of the announcements that government's been making about students and highly skilled, wanting to attract highly skilled scientists and things to the UK. Once people feel that you're in control of the system, they're going to be much more, I think, willing to engage in a debate about, well, let's be more open to all these other people who will be beneficial to our economy and our society.
Brilliant. Well, there's lots more things I'd like to ask you, but I am conscious that people probably have questions of their own. So if we can get the microphones going round, just from the back of the room. Yeah. So the gentleman right at the front here, and the gentleman right at the back there.
Okay.
Hi, thank you for such an interesting talk. I'm Ollie, I'm a reporter for Citywire. It's interesting to hear you talk about the challenges of an ageing population. One of the government's most astronomical costs is the state pension and benefits for older people. What assessment have you made about no deal and the potential impact on those two things?
Well, given that those are entitlements that people have, they're not changed by no deal or not. We've actually made I think a good offer to British citizens that are currently resident in the EU, and they have a particular set of pension arrangements, and we've actually extended what they get. It's called a technical thing, but their pensions may or may not get uprated, and we've actually said that they will get uprated for some period of time now after leaving to give them the security and reassurance that they need, which is a new thing. So actually they will be now in a better situation. But it won't have any direct impact on people who are here in receipt of their pensions at all. But you are right. I mean, there are challenges from an aging population. The OBR does an interesting, what's it called, fiscal risks report. And they do some very long-term projections. And obviously the impact of an aging population on pensions is one area, but also on the NHS and social care. That has real challenges for us, not just our government. All governments will have to think about that. And that's why I think ultimately the only way to solve that problem is to make sure that our economy is growing fast enough to afford all the things that we'd like to do.
And what was your take on Labour's plan to basically lower the pension age back to 70 again?
Yeah, no, I mean, that would clearly be not only unaffordable, but also just is not right. I mean, like, if we're all living longer, we can't have a system. It just doesn't work if you've got more people who are living longer. And remember, I can't remember the exact age that someone was when we first set up the pension system. You probably will, when this pension system was set up. Obviously, life expectancy...
The old joke is that Bismarck set up the German pension system, which everyone then copied, so that the average age was pretty much when people dropped dead. Right. So it looked very generous, but actually the number of claimants was very...
And our dependency ratio, the ratio of kind of working age population to those who are retired, obviously that has changed considerably since the system was set up. And unless the system continues to evolve and make sure that there's parity between those two things, it's simply just it's not affordable. So I think the reforms we made a few years ago when we were in coalition were, of course they were difficult, but they were the right reforms to make. People had the time they needed to transition. And it's right that the system is dynamic, and as life expectancy continues to evolve, the system evolves with that.
Tim Frost from Holman and St Pancras. Wouldn't it be wise for us to get on with appointing the new governor of the Bank of England so that we could allow Mr Carney to return to Canadian domestic politics?
Well, no, I probably can't comment too much on that, but there's a process that's ongoing, and I know the Chancellor is engaged in that.
You did get my letter, right?
There's been a range of people that have been mooted. It's a very attractive job. This fantastic country. It's an exciting place to live. We should be able to attract very high quality people, but it's important that we get the right person. And my general view, as you are kind of hinting at, there's an appropriate degree of political engagement that people in that job should have, right? And I think that is going to be an important part of making sure we get the right person, that the lines are appropriately drawn for those things.
We had a sort of forest of hands down at the front here. So if we just go along the
Hi, Geraldine Scott from the Yorkshire Post. You were really clear then of your support for Northern Powerhouse Rail, which is really, really good to hear. You weren't so clear on HS2. A lot of people up north say, we need both. What is your position on HS2?
And can we just go down the line?
Yeah.
Sorry.
And hi, I'm Martin from the Local Government Chronicle. You talked about regional disparities, regional growth, levelling up. What's the answer to the asymmetric devolution we have in England, and especially for rural and county areas that currently don't have the same devolution as the metro areas?
And the lady behind you?
Hi, I'm Cindy from The Spectator. Really interesting to hear you talk about the abuse that you got as a new MP. I was just wondering what you thought about the row going on in Parliament this week about the abuse that MPs get, especially using words that this government prefers to use, like surrender and collaborating.
Yeah, I didn't ask about that earlier because I had a feeling it would come up.
No, so I'll take those in reverse order. So look, I think it's obviously I'm very fortunate. I feel when I hear about what is going on with lots of my colleagues, I'm in my constituency at least. I don't seem to suffer from the same level of abuse that others do, which I'm grateful for, and it kind of horrifies me when I hear some of the stories that my colleagues are having to endure. And I think I think when you kind of conflate two things there, right? So one is the use of this term surrender, and one is the kind of abuse of MPs. Clearly, abuse of MPs is wrong. We should stamp that out, and we should come down on that as hard as we can. And it's not healthy for anyone, whatever side of the divide you're on. But the use of this use of the term surrender is something that I don't have a problem with, right? We're in politics. We talked about the importance of communicating before, and the Prime Minister said he has an ability to communicate. It's a word that cuts through to people, and if people don't like it, it's because they don't like the fact that underlying that is what they're trying to do. It shines a spotlight on that, which is giving up control of the process to Brussels rather than us as a sovereign country being in control of our Brexit process. So surrender, I think, is a perfectly reasonable word to use, and I think people don't like it because it's effective in, as I said, shining a spotlight on the kind of attempts that they have to undermine our process. On the Local Government Chronicle, nice to see you as former local government minister, dear to my heart. Yeah, no, so you're right. Look, I represent a rural area, and there is certainly a feeling that all this devolution is very city-focused. Now, we do have a couple of devolution areas already that are not as urban as that, which you'll be aware of. But you are right, and it's something that the Secretary of State and Jake Berry are actively working on. We discussed this, the Prime Minister discussed this at Cabinet just a couple of weeks ago, and I think we've talked about plans that we might have for future devolution and the models that will be. I mean, that's something that has been talked about for a while, so I think I'll watch this space. But you are actually right. We need to have an offer that works for everybody, not just people who happen to live in Manchester or Liverpool or wherever else. And your question about HS2 and Northern Rail. Yeah, look, on HS2, we've appointed someone, or the government's appointed Doug Oakerby to conduct a relatively rapid review of it. It's due to report at some point in the coming months. I don't think there's an exact date, but it was designed to be done quickly. And the reason for that is simple. Look, the cost of this thing has escalated considerably from when it first was approved. And partly that's because a lot of the estimates for the engineering and everything have turned out to be wrong. Part of it is because of changes that were made as the bill progressed through Parliament. But given we have a kind of go, no-go decision at the end of this year to make, I think it was new Prime Minister, new government. It's right that we kind of reviewed it, given the cost escalation. That work is ongoing, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to kind of speculate on the outcome of that. But I think you're right to say, what does HS2 mean for people in the north, right? And, I think there's two things. One is, most people in the north would probably say, well, what's a rail line between Birmingham and London got to do with me? But HS2 does go all the way up, and there's different phases of it. So the Birmingham to London bit, the bit that's causing all the controversy at the moment, is phase 1. And then there's something called phase 2B, which is for those of you that are into this stuff, which is the Y at the top that comes up into Yorkshire and comes up into Manchester. Now that is actually linked to Northern Powerhouse Rail. You need those connections at the top to make some of the Northern Powerhouse Rail projects work. So whatever skepticism people might have about HS2 if they think it's not a northern project, bits of it certainly are relevant for this goal of connecting up the northern cities. But I said they are different things. Birmingham and London, the original thesis for investing in that line was capacity, that line was at capacity. The reason to connect up all the northern cities is about making them commutable within themselves, which will drive economic growth. So I think economics would tell you there's probably a higher return for things that do that than just increasing capacity on lines from London to Birmingham, right? So, but different things will all have different paybacks and different returns. But certainly, I think the return on increasing the connectivity among northern cities will be very high.
And same again on this.
Hiya. You've often in the language which we're using about some of the new spending which is coming through, it's being termed as investment, and that it's coming on what is seemingly current expenditure, how much of the new money which is going to be announced is actually will be going into making sure that education, the NHS, will be sort of transformed and well funded for the future, rather than simply acting as a stopgap to fund where the capacity isn't there at the moment?
So yeah, there were a couple more.
Stuart from Liverpool. One thing I heard in, I think, Jeremy Hunt's leadership candidate, he talked about expanding the use of auto-enrolment for health and social care for the future. I just wonder if you could talk, maybe if you had any more ideas about how we can use the ideas of auto-enrolment to reduce the state liabilities, which are horrendous for the future.
And one last one from Liston.
Hey, you talk about Boris being an effective communicator, and so is Jeremy Corbyn, as he showed a couple of years ago, cutting through to a wide variety of people. Are you more or less worried about him than you were 2.5 years ago?
Great. So on the social care question, look, so there's a kind of live discussion about what a long-term solution to social care looks like, and I'm not gonna lie, that it's tricky, as we discovered in the last election campaign, and it's tricky, I think, partly because people don't understand the current system, right? Because unless you've actually had to experience it, you might have a view that it will be okay for you, and actually, as it's currently designed, you could have some of your assets at risk, and then so if you try and tweak that, and it's better than it is currently, but you're hearing it for the first time, it still sounds bad to many people. So I think trying to solve it is going to be tricky, of course. I think contributory schemes, as you mentioned, have been mooted in the past. They no doubt will be part of the conversation. The Select Committee in Parliament, the joint kind of cross-party Select Committee, Health and Social Care and Local Government Select Committee, I think suggested something similar to that, doing it through a model on the German system. So it's certainly an idea that is out there. And my view is, if you're going to look at this, you've got to look at the full range of options. If we're going to try and solve this problem right, you should put everything there to have a look at and go through it. But obviously that work is being led by the Health Secretary, as we speak. To the question on spending, you are right. So the spending review concerns day-to-day spending, current spending, as you rightly acknowledged. Is it in general, spending reviews are for multiple years because we wanted to do this spending review very quickly and get it done so we could focus on Brexit and some of these other things. We decided to do a 1-year spending review, which obviously takes less time. And so in that sense, fair enough, right? It's only a 1-year spending review. Within that, though, there are a couple of things, and actually the two examples you raised, where there is more long-term certainty. One is the NHS, which, as you know, has a 5-year settlement, and that's I think a very good 5-year settlement, £34 billion at the end of that 5 years. So they have a plan. They know what they're doing. They should be able to execute to that and start delivering with that extra resource. And indeed, Simon Stevens, who runs the NHS, when that plan was announced, said, "I've got what I need to go and execute my plan," which is all public. So I think that's good. And then uniquely, schools were the other area where in this spending review we decided to do a multi-year settlement, and that's because the Prime Minister specifically had pledged at a certain amount at a certain time, and we wanted to deliver on his promise. So schools now have a 3-year settlement, so they also can plan, and part of that planning has enabled them to figure out a new way to pay teachers. And you would have heard about our plans to get teacher salaries up to £30,000. They can start to have those conversations because they've got that slightly more medium-term view of what their budgets are going to be. But you're right. I mean, ordinarily it would be better to have multi-year spending reviews because it gives you that ability to plan over a slightly medium time period. But your other point about investment, this was day-to-day spending. The Chancellor's been very clear that capital investing, and what we most think about is investing in infrastructure and innovation and in broadband, that's something that we haven't come to yet, and we will. And he said very specifically, we should look at the interest rate environment that we're currently in, which is attractive, and see whether our plans for investing in infrastructure for the long term are right, given that interest rates. And if you're going to do infrastructure investing, it's definitely better if you have a longer term view, because planning those kinds of projects, they don't happen overnight. You need to have a multi-year view. So that's something that we're looking at. And then the last question was about,
are you more or less
terrified
of
Jeremy? Yeah, no, definitely less, right? Like, I mean, he kind of cut through in a way that took us by surprise. We've learned a lot more about him since then, and everything that we've learned has been, I think, enormously helpful to us politically, not least the conference that they had a week ago, where there are so many things they're saying that I think just will not resonate with British people, right? And actually, it gives us something to go after, because the curtain's been pulled back. It's pretty clear. Like, you look at what they're talking about: abolishing Ofsted, taking 10% of shares, getting the unions back to set wages for every single sector, all of these things, right? It's pretty clear that their view of the free enterprise economy is fundamentally different to ours, right? If you own a house, if you have started a business, if you've got savings, none of that, according to Jeremy Corbyn, none of that is yours, essentially, right? All of that is the state's, and they will take it if they want to. They will decide when you sell it, what price you sell it at, what wages you have to pay will be decided by the unions. They will take money from your pension if they want to. Like, that is a fundamental change in how our economic discourse is working. And I think that will really resonate with people once we start having that conversation with them. I think the other thing that has changed since then is, I think people always had doubts about whether he could lead, and that slightly got washed over because we did a very bad job at explaining that and kept talking about the 70s and Venezuela and all this stuff in 2017. What's clear now is we've seen him at work, right, for the last couple of years, and people have seen time and time again that he's not able to make tough decisions, right? This whole Brexit thing, regardless of what you think, the focus groups show, his kind of dither and his indecision comes through, right? He doesn't come across to people, even people who voted Remain, even people who are Labour supporters, he doesn't come across as a strong leader with convictions and the ability to lead a country. And that, the gap between people's view of Boris and him on that score is now very, very wide, because, as I said, we've seen him at work for the last couple of years, and it doesn't matter what jacket he wears and whether his tie's done up and any of that stuff. Like, his just ability to do the day job has been shone, a spotlight has been shone on that, and it's a very helpful one for us, I think.
The line I've used is that he's trying to ride two horses at once on Brexit, but they're galloping in opposite directions.
Yes, and that is painful. So, yeah.
And hopefully one more round of questions. So the gentleman there.
Hello. Just I've spent a lot of time with small business owners, and I think we've slightly lost the argument at this point on how we're supporting, as Conservatives, small business owners, and business rate are a serious bone of contention, certainly in the rural areas. So kind of would like to hear your view on where we're going with that, whether or not there's an opportunity post-Brexit to be a little bit more competitive, change the threshold with that. Any thoughts?
So I've just seen my wonderful colleague Nick King, our head of business, walk in, who's the author of a brilliant report.
Perfect timing
on how we can help small businesses by ridding them of the burden of tax and administration, launched by Sajid Javid himself. Sorry.
Brilliant. No, well, Anthony, thanks for that. Thanks for the question. A very good one. I think we're ending. It's a good one to end on. I mean, you should all read this Popular Capitalism report that Rob's written, because some of the polling in there is quite troubling, and small business is one of them, right? You're absolutely right. We pride ourselves on being a party of small business, and that doesn't clearly shine through in the polling that's in the report. So we probably do need something big bang, right? Nick's idea is very big bang, and we haven't probably had a big bang idea for small businesses in a while. We've done lots of piecemeal things, and the employment allowance is one where you get I think £3,000 discount on your national insurance bill as a small employer. Obviously, corporation tax has been brought down considerably, but that doesn't always benefit small businesses because they don't pay it. And business rates is their other major burden, and you're right. Now, look, we have done a lot on business rates, which doesn't always cut through. I mean, I saw this as a local government minister, where a third of all businesses now no longer pay business rates because of the increase. We doubled the threshold for small business rate relief, for rural rate relief. We made it more generous. It covered more people. So, we have done a decent amount. That doesn't stop it being a tax that people don't like. The flip side is it raises, I think, £25 billion a year. It's a big chunk of change. And if we are going to try and reform it and change it, we need to figure out what's going to replace it. And that's not always easy, because as soon as you say, okay, fine, well, we won't do that, we'll do this instead, then all the people who don't like the new system will be like, oh, well, we don't want that either. So it's not an easy one, I'll be honest. Now, obviously, the digital service tax is something that we've put in will come into force next year, which is a sales tax for social media firms, marketplaces, search firms, which will, I think, slightly redress the balance, and people can see that and see that it will make a difference. And we've put that in pending a kind of more global solution. And we're trying to do other things to help the high street. We have this thing called the High Streets Fund, which again is funding small towns around the country to revitalize their high streets. But I think there's a broader point when people are upset about business rates. Business models are changing, and some of this investment we're putting in will help that transition, help high streets adapt. But I think we do need to be careful as Conservatives as well. We want to make sure that we manage transitions in communities, but we also believe in a free enterprise economy, and that does mean that business models are going to change over time, and we shouldn't necessarily use the tax system to kind of stop that from happening if that is ultimately a good thing for consumers and in the long run will be good, good for shoppers and good for the economy. So I'm just cautious there, but you are right. I think we probably do need something big bang when it comes to small businesses, because some of the things we're doing have not cut through, and Nick's got an interesting idea that his old boss and my boss now in the Treasury should maybe have a look at again.
And one sort of final question. If you were writing the manifesto tomorrow, obviously it would say get Brexit done at the top and all that stuff. What would be, what if they were like, because you talked there about Big Bang, and one of the things that, as well as coming up with policies, we occasionally go and try and find out what the voters actually think of them, so that when we pitch them to people like you, we can say, and actually this is really, really popular. And one of the things we found, there was, apart from the fact that the voters agreed with all of our policy ideas and thought we were utterly wonderful, is that there's a real appetite for radicalism. As we saw in 2017, the Conservative Party is not going to win another election as the party of competent management and steady as she goes. I mean, it's a change election when it happens. And voters want policy. One thing came through was that people want ideas that are so big they can be seen from space. And for me, obviously small businesses, welfare, tax, but also housing is a key area for us. Just this idea that we now have 3.2 million people who would have been homeowners in 2008 but now aren't. So what would be like if you were doing that kind of list in your head, Brexit aside, what would be the things which if you could fix like tomorrow, or come up or have solutions? Yeah. What would be your?
Well, I think that housing is right, because housing is something that does cut through, right? And if there is a radical solution on housing that people can see that they will benefit from it, that would be very helpful. So a lot of attention will be put on that. Tax is another obvious area which always cuts through to people. Changes in taxation, I think, are big ideas that cut through. But actually, I'll end on this, because I think policies, yes, we are all excited about policies. We're sitting here at a think tank event at a Conservative Party conference. Right? That puts us in like 0.1% of the population, right? Most people are not able to name many policies, right? This is the amazing thing about the Northern Powerhouse, as an aside. It was something that those of you that might campaign in the North, people know the phrase, right? The fact that they know the phrase and they associate it with a Conservative government, I think is extraordinary, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if they don't quite know what does it mean and you're not doing enough, Conservatives, Northern Powerhouse, that is really quite impressive that we've got that to cut through. So, more than the policies, it's something you said right at the beginning, it's about our values, right? So when we have this election, elections at the end of the day, they're a statement of values. What do we believe in? And how do we communicate that to people in a way that makes them think, these guys get my life, and they're going to make sure that my life is better as a result of them being in government. And that may be because they're going to have better schools for my kids. It may be because they're going to help me get on the housing ladder. But more broadly, it's just going to be because they get what is important to me, and they're going to go and deliver it for me. So I think communicating our values is going to be far more important actually than making sure we have every single policy that cuts through. And that's why this party conference about getting Brexit done and moving on is so important, right? It's a way for us to kind of renew ourselves, be the change party, as you said, coming into this election, full of confidence with what we believe, and then with a kind of inspiring story to tell about why we want to make people's lives better. If we focus on that, I think we're going to be in very good shape.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much to Rishi Sunak. We'll be having a drinks reception here at 7 o'clock, and then tomorrow our programme starts and runs all the way through. So I do hope you can join us then. In the meantime, please join me in thanking Rishi Sunak.
Thanks.